Good morning, everyone. We're going to get started right at 9. Thank you for joining us.
I am ready. I still see the button for start broadcast on my screen, so nobody sees my screen yet, right?
They should be able to see your screen. You click start broadcast.
Okay.
All right. Good morning, everyone. My name is Ted Harris. I am with the Pennsylvania Petroleum Association. I would like to welcome you all to our monthly webinar series. We normally do this the first Tuesday of each month. We're making an exception here this month, but it's normally each Tuesday at 9 a.m. on different topics. Before we get started today, I would like to encourage you to ask questions. We will do a Q&A at the end of after Ed's presentation. You're going to be on mute for the entire webinar, but you are able to ask questions through the question feature and GoToWebinar. So please type in your questions during Ed's presentation, and like I said, we will address them afterwards. At this point, I would like to introduce our presenter. Ed Kubinski is the Director of Regulatory Affairs, Training and Certification for Cromco. The topic today that Ed will be covering is PA DEP UST regulations. Will you be in compliance? So Ed, I'll pass it all to you at this point. Thank you.
All right, thanks everybody for attending. I have quite a few slides to go through here and quite a bit of information to get out to you. So we're going to be moving pretty fast through the presentation because I want to keep some time at the end for the Q&A. So why are we here? So in 2015, the EPA introduced new underground storage tank regulations that went into effect in the country. However, many of the states, those rules didn't go into effect yet. So you'll see on the slide here, there's a number of states in dark green, Pennsylvania, which is one of them. And Pennsylvania is what we call a SPA state. So what that means is that Pennsylvania is authorized to implement their own underground storage tank program because EPA gave them state program approval. That's what SPA stands for, to operate or to run their underground tank program. And with the new EPA regulations, Pennsylvania DEP had until 10/13 of 2018 to revise and update their regulations to include all this new equipment testing and inspections that EPA included in their regulations. A number of states, if you know anything about the regulatory process, it happens rather slow. Pennsylvania got their new regs done and implemented on December 22nd, 2018. So just a few months ago is when the new Pennsylvania regulations went into effect. And the Pennsylvania regulations are the only thing that you guys need to be concerned with. Everything that was included in the EPA regulations is now included in Pennsylvania DEP's regulations, so you don't have to worry about two sets of regulations. Now we're going to get into it. Pennsylvania DEP's rules are Chapter 245. And the first thing I want to talk about is certified companies and certified individuals. In Pennsylvania, they have a pretty rigorous certification program for people doing work on underground storage tanks. And you as owner-operators need to know that you need to only be hiring certified companies and certified individuals to do the work. Don't be afraid to ask the company that you're hiring to provide their certification information. That should be very easy for them to do. So both the companies and the individuals that are doing the work need to be certified. This is an example of one of our individual certifications, and as you can see on the left-hand side here, there's a number of categories within the certifications that you can have with DEP, and I'm going to get into some of these important categories in a moment here. So understanding the underground storage tank certification categories, the ones we need to be concerned with are right here with the new regs. UMX is the underground storage tank installer. UMI is a new certification category that allows an individual to do minor modifications that do not include excavation. So containment sump repairs and things like that nature that don't require excavation to do the work. If excavation is required, you need to make sure a UMX is doing the work. UMR is underground tank remover, so if you're removing tanks, you need to make sure you're hiring a UMR individual. UTT is underground tank tester, so that's the testing category, and you'll see everything that's included in that coming up. And IUM is the underground tank inspector category, so that's the guy that comes around every 3 years and does your facility operations inspection for you. So the focus today is going to be all this new testing, equipment testing and inspections that are going to need to be done. So one thing I want to make everybody aware of, you can go online, and this is available to everybody. You can go to the PA DEP website, and you can actually put in your facility identification number, and you can see what the DEP knows about your tank system. So here you can see the date the tanks are installed, the capacity of the tanks, what's being stored in the tanks, and on the far right side you can see when your next facility operations inspection is due. What DEP did recently is they provided that button that I'm pointing to there. Click here for tank components. You can click on that button now and you can actually see all the attributes of your tank system. So the construction of your tanks, the construction of your piping, the install date of your tanks, what release detection methods you're doing, all that information is available right on the DEP website for everybody to use. And I encourage you as owners to look at that periodically to make sure that it's up to date and accurate. It's also something that certified individuals can use when they're doing work out at underground tank sites. They can go and see what should be at the facility and compare it to, what they actually see when they're out there. So there's the link where you can go to find that information. Now we're going to get into the bad news, all this new testing that you're going to have to be doing at your sites. First thing I want to let you know is PEI, Petroleum Equipment Institute, has an RP 1200, Recommended Practice 1200, which is the industry standard that covers all of this new testing that needs to be done. So whoever you're hiring for doing your testing at your facilities, make sure that they're familiar with this PEI RP 1200 document, because this is the standard that is covering all this new testing. So the first thing I'm going to get into is overfill equipment inspections. So the your overfill equipment, back in the original regulations, both the EPA and the Pennsylvania DEP, the regulations required you to install overfill equipment into your tanks, and that was it. It needed to be installed, it needed to be there, and that was it. These new regulations focus on the upkeep and operation and continued maintenance of all this equipment. So now, not only does the overfill equipment, the spill buckets, containment sumps, all this equipment needs to be installed, but it also needs to be checked now every year or every 3 years. And most of the equipment inspections is going to be every 3 years, but there is some that is an annual, and we'll get into that in a little bit. But overfill equipment, pretty much you have 3 options for overfill equipment in your underground tanks. You could have an automatic shutoff device, which is that overfill drop tube that's in the fill in your tank. If that's being used, it needs to be set to shut off delivery no higher than 95% tank capacity. If you're using ball floats for overfill protection, that's a vent restriction device. it needs to restrict delivery at 90% of tank capacity. And there's a big difference between the two. The drop tubes shut off delivery to the tanks. The ball floats restrict the delivery, so they slow the delivery down, but they don't completely stop the delivery. And then there's also a high-level alarm, an audible or visual alarm. And if you're using the high-level alarm for overfill, it needs to be set to alarm no higher than 90% tank capacity. Once again, overfill equipment is going to need to be inspected once every 3 years moving forward. So here's a little picture of a tank. That first arrow there, that's your stage 1 vapor recovery riser or your vent extractor. That's where your ball float would be installed. You can see the flapper valve or automatic shutoff device installed in the fill. That's where your delivery drivers are filling your tanks. And then the high-level alarm would be attached to your automatic tank gauge. So as the float moves up, it would set off the outside audible alarm. So how do you inspect the overfill equipment? This is covered in Chapter 7 of PEI RP 1200. So if we are doing an overfill inspection on an automatic shutoff device, a drop tube, we're going to remove and inspect the drop tube for damage. It needs to come out of the tank unless the manufacturer has a procedure for testing and inspecting the drop tube while it's installed in the tank. Then you can follow manufacturer's guidelines for doing that. But we remove it from the tank and inspect it for damage, make sure the floats move freely, make sure any latch mechanisms work. If there's a bypass valve, we make sure it's open. And one of the critical parts is measuring the drop tube to make sure that it shuts off at 95% in that tank. So here's some of the common problems that we see with drop tubes: sticks being broken and remaining inside the drop tube. That will defeat the flapper valve. It will never work if the stick is still in the drop tube. Improper measurements is one we see quite often as well. They're set well higher than 95% tank capacity. That would be out of compliance. And then broken flapper valves, we see them periodically as well. Here's a picture of one that was installed in a tank for only 6 months. We removed it to take a look, and as you can see, the flappers go on, so there was never any overfill protection in that tank. So that's kind of the reason why these inspections are being done with the new regulations, because the equipment doesn't last forever. Things break, things get damaged. They need to be checked periodically to make sure that they're still working. Pass-fail criteria, it's pretty simple. If the automatic shutoff device functions as designed and complete product flow is shut off at 95%, it passes the inspection. Moving on to ball floats. When we're inspecting ball floats, and this is what a ball float looks like, many of you may not have seen it. They've been installed many years in the tanks and for a long time, and they may be difficult to remove. So we remove the ball float and inspect it. We check the ball for holes or cracks. We make sure that the vent hole, there should be a small vent hole toward the top of the device, make sure that it's open. We need to measure for 90% level and make sure that that ball is restricting delivery at 90% in the tank. We also need to visually verify that all tank top fittings are vapor tight. And PEI RP 100, 1200, many of the PEI documents recommend removal of the ball floats because they've caused problems over the years. So there's a lot of recommendations to remove them. However, if you have them and they're functioning properly and they're inspected, they pass the inspection, you can continue to use ball floats indefinitely. You don't have to remove them if you have them. As long as they are set up properly for your tank configuration, they pass their inspection every 3 years, you can continue to use them. However, after 12/22 of 2018, you may no longer install ball floats in your tank for overfill protection. So with the new regulations, anything new going in the ground, you cannot use ball floats for overfill protection. So don't install them. So this is what they can look like after many years of being in the tanks and never inspected. Cages corroded. That weep hole that I talked about is corroded. It's not open. There's all different types of sizes of ball floats. So we've seen many tanks where they have very short ball floats in the tank and they're not set at 90%. They would need to be removed, and another form of overfill would need to be used if we find a ball float that's too high in the tank. Pass-fail criteria. Basically, if the visual inspection of the ball float after you remove it from the tank passes the inspection, it functions as designed, and we measure it, and restriction occurs no higher than 90% tank capacity, and the tank top fittings are vapor tight, it passes the inspection. However, if any of the following configurations exist, and this is all in RP 1200, if any of these conditions exist, the ball float would fail the inspection. And the one that I have highlighted there is the ball float cannot be removed from the tank. So if you do have ball floats, they may have been in there for 20 years or so, they've never been removed, it is a possibility that that ball float might not be able to be removed without some excavation, unfortunately. Many companies have easy outs and some tools to get them out, but there are times that they can't be removed and excavation is required to get them out. In that case, you would have to get rid of the ball float and go to another method of overfill protection. Some contractors say, well, if the ball float's stuck, why can't I just knock the ball out of the tank or knock the ball out of the ball float assembly and install a flapper valve here? Well, if you see on the right-hand side, you have the overfill drop tube, which is typically set at 95% tank capacity. And you see on the left-hand side of this tank here, the ball float. If you knock the ball out of the ball float assembly, that tube there that's in the tank is set at 90% of tank capacity. So as fuel is being delivered to the tank, 300 gallons per minute from your delivery driver, the fuel level rises before it ever hits the flapper valve. If that's set at 95%, it's going to hit that ball float tube, and 300 gallons per minute is going to be shooting up into your vent line and come squirting out your vent. So that's why we don't want contractors to be just knocking the ball out, forgetting that it's there, and installing a drop tube. Make sure your contractors are not doing that, because they're not doing a service. There's a potential for, if the fuel level gets high enough in the tank, that fuel is going to come squirting out your fence. So don't knock the balls out of the tank. Pennsylvania DEP also has a guidance document out there that says if ball floats and drop tubes are installed together in the same tank, the ball float must be removed. So make sure your contractors know that as well. If those two devices are in the tank, the ball float needs to be removed because it can interfere with the function of the drop tube flapper valve. All right, moving on to a high-level alarm. If we're inspecting that high-level alarm, we're going to compare the automatic tank gauge fuel level to the stick level. We're going to make sure that that overfill alarm is on in the programming. We're going to activate the overfill alarm, and we're going to do that by removing the automatic tank gauge probe from the tank. We're going to slide the float up to activate the alarm. We're going to measure again and make sure that the float is at 90% when that alarm goes off. And that's pretty much it. You can see there's a typical tank probe removed from the tank. You see us measuring, and we're measuring that top float to make sure that it sets off that outside alarm at 90%. So if the inspection of the probe and the float is all good, the alarm goes off at 90%, everything's good, and the high-level alarm passes the inspection. One thing you need to know, no matter what, if we're doing a flapper valve, ball float, or high-level alarm, you really need to provide your service provider with the tank charts for your facilities. Hopefully you have that on file. If not, you can contact your tank manufacturer. You can also go to some of the tank manufacturers' websites. They have many tank charts available in their libraries. There's also a way to generate tank charts for steel tanks as well. And all that can be done online right here. But bottom line is, make sure you have a tank chart that you can provide to your service provider so they can do their job. They need to use that tank chart so they can determine where 90 and 95% is in the tank system. Pennsylvania DEP also did a real good job of making new forms to document all these new inspections and testing that need to be done. So whoever is doing your overfill verifications, they need to document this on the Pennsylvania DEP form. If the company doing the work has their own form, that's fine, but when the 3-year facility operations inspection occurs and your inspector comes around, they are going to be looking for the Pennsylvania DEP forms. These tests must be documented on the PA DEP forms, or you might have a problem with your 3-year inspection. Pennsylvania DEP is training all of the certified individuals right now that they should be looking for these forms when they're doing their inspections. One thing to note here, the PA DEP certified individuals that are able to do the overfill inspections are only the UMX and the UMI individuals. So the UTT, the IUM, all those other certification categories, those individuals are not eligible to do the overfill verifications. It must be a UMX or UMI certified individual. All right, we're going to move on to spill buckets now. With the old regulations, spill buckets had to be installed and never checked, only tested at installation after 11/10 of 07. Now your spill buckets are going to need to be visually inspected every 30 days with these walkthrough inspections that we'll get to in a little bit later, but they're also going to need to be tested once every 3 years. Chapter 6 in RP 1200 covers this: containment testing and spill bucket testing. Like I said, anything after 11/10 of 07, if you install the spill bucket then, it should have been tested at installation. Now it's going to need to be done every 3 years, unless you install the double wall spill bucket and you're monitoring that interstitial space of the double wall spill bucket every 30 days. That can get you out of the testing. The key is documenting that you are checking that interstitial space every 30 days. It's just like if you had double wall tanks or double wall lines, you would need to monitor the interstitial space of the spill bucket once every 30 days. If we are testing the spill buckets, it can be a hydrostatic or it can be a vacuum test. So if we are doing hydrostatic testing, the way it's done is clean, inspect, repair any defects with the spill bucket. We're going to make sure the cap and adapter are sealed tightly, or we use a plumber's plug to isolate the tank from the spill bucket. We're going to make sure any drain valves are leak tight or they're permanently plugged or removed. We fill the spill bucket to within 1.5 inches of the top of the bucket. We measure it to a 1/16 of an inch. We wait 1 hour, and as long as that water level drops less than 1/8 of an inch over the course of an hour, the bucket passes the test. If the water level drops 1/8 of an inch or greater, the spill bucket is considered a fail. So once again, we take a look at the spill buckets, and this is something that you're going to need to start doing once every 30 days, as I'll get into later. But you're going to need to take a good visual inspection of that spill bucket, make sure it can pass a test. Look for any cracks and holes in the bucket. This is obviously something that should be handled immediately. Some of the older buckets are a little bit more difficult to inspect. Can't get in there to see everything, but you need to do the best you can when inspecting these spill buckets. Here's what it looks like when the spill bucket is filled up to within 1.5 inches of the top. All right. I also mentioned that we can do vacuum testing of the spill buckets. The advantage of the vacuum test is that it's a lot quicker. It's a 1-minute test instead of a 1-hour test. Another difference is you obviously don't need to use water to do a vacuum test of your spill bucket, so you don't have to worry about proper disposal of that petroleum contact water that you do when you have a hydrostatic test of the spill bucket. The disadvantage of a vacuum test is that it's a little bit harder to pass the test. So you're pulling about 1 psi of vacuum throughout the entire bucket, and it has to maintain that vacuum for 1 minute. So basically, when we're doing a vacuum test, we do the same thing: clean, inspect, repair, make sure the caps and adapters are tight, drain valves removed or plugged. We're going to seal our test equipment to the top of the spill bucket. We apply 30 inches of water column vacuum, which is the equivalent of about 1 psi of vacuum. It has to hold for 1 minute, and if that vacuum level drops below 26 inches of water column vacuum, it fails the test. As long as it maintains 26 inches or higher, it would pass the test. Here's a couple photos of vacuum testing being done, the apparatus, and the gauge that we use to measure the vacuum. You can see there 30 inches of water column vacuum. If we have a double wall spill bucket and we need to test that interstitial space of the spill bucket because it's not being inspected every 30 days, again, we clean, inspect, repair. We're going to attach our vacuum source to the secondary of the spill bucket, and we only apply 15 inches of water column vacuum, so about a half of a psi to the interstitial space. Again, it's a 1 minute test, and as long as that ending vacuum level is 12 inches or greater, the test of the interstitial space passes the test. So you may say to yourself, well, I also have spill buckets around my stage 1 gasoline vapor recovery port. Do I need to test that bucket? According to the EPA and Pennsylvania DEP, that bucket does not need to be tested every 3 years. Only the fills that are used to where your delivery driver is connecting to fill the tank, those are the buckets that need to be tested. It is optional to test the other buckets. It's not a requirement. Again, Pennsylvania DEP has a form for documenting spill bucket testing. The form must be used by your service provider. The certified individual is eligible to do this work. Just like the Overfill, UMX and UMI, they can do this testing. But you also have the UTT certified individuals, and also the IUM inspectors can do this test. So many more certified individuals are available to perform spill bucket testing. Whereas the Overfill, it's only the UMX and the UMI individuals able to do this work. Now we're going to move on to containment sump testing. All right, if interstitial monitoring is used for your double wall piping release detection, you're going to need to test your single wall submersible sumps, dispenser sumps, and any transition sumps for tightness every 3 years. Or have double wall sumps that are monitored via liquid pressure or vacuum. I've only seen one site in PA so far that had double wall sumps. Most sumps are single wall. So if you are using interstitial monitoring for release detection, and that's your primary method of release detection or your only method of release detection, that you're going to have to test your sumps every 3 years. So just a note, in Pennsylvania, double wall piping with interstitial monitoring and positive pump shutdown has been a requirement for new systems installed on or after 11/10 of 2007. So if you modified your piping or put in new tanks and piping after that date, you are required to do interstitial monitoring, and you are going to be required to test your containment sumps every 3 years. So all systems installed after that date are going to require containment sump testing every 3 years. So make note of that. It is very critical for you to know what method of release detection you're using for your piping. If your piping system was installed prior to 11/10 of 07, you have other options other than interstitial monitoring. So you may have installed double wall piping prior to 11/10 of 07. If that's the case, you can use other methods of release detection other than interstitial monitoring. You can do an annual line test. You can have electronic line leak detectors doing a 0.2 monthly test. an electronic leak detector doing a 0.1 gallon per hour annual test, you can be doing SIR for your piping release detection, as long as that double wall piping was installed prior to 11/10 of 07. No sump testing would be required if you're using one of those methods of release detection and your piping was installed prior to that date. Single wall piping, no containment sump testing whatsoever. You can't do interstitial monitoring on single wall piping, so that's not even an option for release detection, so no sump testing if you have single wall piping, even if you have containment sumps at your dispensers and your tank sumps. If we are doing containment sump testing according to RP 1200, the way it's done is we do a good visual inspection of the sump, clean, inspect, repair any defects. You have to fill the sump with water 4 inches above the highest penetration or side wall seam. Again, we measure to within a 1/16 of an inch. It's a 1-hour test, and same as spill buckets, as long as that water level does not drop 1/8 of an inch or greater, it would pass the test. So that's the pass-fail threshold, 1/8 of an inch. If it drops 1/8 of an inch or greater, the containment sump would fail the test and you would need to look to do some repairs to your containment sump. So again, we need to do a good visual inspection. We need to isolate, we need to be able to isolate the piping in your containment sumps. We can't leave interstitial spaces open. Cracked boots that have been around for many years, that's oftentimes a problem. These penetration boots that are cracked and broken, that could be a problem as well. We need to be able to isolate all that so that we can fill the containment sump with water and it's not going to leak out these penetration fittings. So here's some pictures of the water going into the sumps. You'll see some video a little bit later on in the webinar. Many of you may have heard about some low-level containment sump testing in other states. It is an option in other states to do some low-level testing if you had certain equipment installed and programmed in your sumps. However, Pennsylvania DEP is not allowing low-level hydrostatic testing at this time, unless it becomes incorporated into PEI RP 1200. Just so you know, PEI RP 1200 Chapter 6 is open for public comment right now. They are looking at a low-level test protocol being incorporated into the document. We still have about 2 weeks before a little less than 2 weeks before the end of the public comment period. You could go to www.pei.org/RP1200 if you want to submit comments on the protocol. But as of now, there is no low-level hydrostatic testing in Pennsylvania. There are other alternative methods to testing sumps without water. There's dry sump. There is leak detection technologies. I just want to make you aware of a couple of these other options. They're not widely being used. They're relatively new to the industry, but they are out there. There is some other quicker testing electronic equipment that can also do hydrostatic testing out there. So test liquid handling before and after containment sump and spill bucket testing. What we use is what we call water wagons. We trailer about 500 gallons of water to the site. We use the water for the testing, and then we remove the water after the test is completed. So here's some pictures of our trucks and trailers. We have a potable water tower here at our yard in Plymouth Meeting where we fill up the trucks, and we have a 5,000 gallon trailer that's used to dispose of the dirty water. Here's some pictures and some video of some containment testing being done at a site. We're visually inspecting, we're measuring, putting a measuring stick or a tape measure in the containment sumps prior to introducing the water. And here we go, introducing the water into a tank sump to perform a hydrostatic test. Make sure all the penetration boots are tight, all interstitial spaces are closed off. Obviously, we pull the sensors out of the tank. We don't want to put the sensors into alarm, so we need to take those out of the sumps. and then we fill the sump to within 4 inches above the highest sump penetration or sidewall seam. This is what it looks like when we're doing the test. We also go out and do the under-dispenser containment sumps. Need to do a good visual inspection under the dispensers and take a look at those sumps prior to doing the test. Here we are inspecting. And after we're done inspecting and making sure everything looks tight, we're dropping the water into the sump. And again, and again, and again. Here we are doing our under-dispenser containment sump test. Again, after we do the testing, we vac it out. You know, some companies have a vac truck come out and vac out the water after containment testing is being done. Talk to your service provider and see how they handle that. There we are backing out the tank sump. Again, documentation. Pennsylvania DEP has forms now that need to be completed to document containment sump testing. Make sure your service provider is using these forms. DEP certified individuals able to do this testing, again, are the UMX, the UMI, the UTT, and the IUM. They all can do containment sump testing. Moving on to automatic tank gauge and leak detection functionality testing. So moving forward, we're going to need to test the automatic tank gauges, and all equipment being used for leak detection is going to have to be tested for proper operation on an annual basis. So unlike the spill buckets, the overfill, and the containment sump, which are done once every 3 years, your ATGs, your sensors, and your leak detectors, those tests are going to have to be done on an annual basis, okay? We're going to be Chapter 8 in RP 1200 covers testing the automatic tank gauges and all the sensors. Here's obviously not where a sensor is supposed to be. It should be in the tank sump, but that sensor was connected to the tank gauge. As you can see, this sensor was not properly positioned. One note, just want you to make sure you never ignore any alarms, never manipulate, disable, or move sensors out of where they're supposed to be installed so that they don't alarm when they're supposed to alarm. Those sensors are there for a reason. They're there to detect problems and notify you when there is a problem, and that's when you should investigate it. Don't fudge with your dispensers or with your sensors. Pennsylvania DEP also has a form for documenting the ATG and sensor functionality testing. Mechanical and electronic line leak detectors. You have to do a 3 gallon per hour at 10 psi test on your automatic line leak detectors that are installed on pressurized piping. Chapter 9 in RP 1200 covers how to do that. Again, DEP has a form for that, so make sure your service providers are using the appropriate forms. The individual is able to do this work. Again, the UMX, the UMI, the UTT, IUM. Pretty much everybody can do it. One thing to note here, when your certified tester is performing spill bucket testing, overfill testing, and containment sump testing, I want you to be aware that DEP requires the certified individuals to report failures to the regional office within 48 hours. So we as a tester are obligated by the regulations to notify DEP when any of those pieces of equipment fail within 48 hours, and we need to send in the test report to do that. So you can expect some pretty quick follow-up from PA DEP when we find issues. You're going to make sure you're going to want to need to get your repairs in order and managed rather quickly. So the next thing I'm going to talk about with these new regulations are walkthrough inspections. We're going to have to do 30-day walk-around inspections and annual walkthrough inspections, and you're going to need to document these. So for your 30-day walkthrough inspection, you're going to need to take a look at your spill buckets every 30 days. You're going to need to look at the spill bucket and make sure there's no damage, no cracks, no holes in the sides, the bottoms of the spill bucket. Make sure there's no broken tank sticks in the fill. Make sure the cap and adapter is in good condition. Make sure you remove and properly dispose of any liquid or debris in the spill buckets. The buckets are supposed to be kept clean and dry at all times, and it's very easy for an inspector to write you up a violation if you have liquid or debris in your spill buckets. You need to keep them clean and dry at all times. Next thing you need to do every 30 days, you need to take a look at your automatic tank gauges. You need to make sure that the system's on, make sure there's no active alarms, and make sure you've documented your monthly release detection records for your tanks and or your piping. This is something that you should be doing every 30 days already. It's nothing that's that new. You should be doing it. The key is making sure that you document that you're doing that now, every 30 days. So a couple other things to note. With PA DEP's old regulations, they required monthly sump visual checks for double wall pressurized piping. That's no longer required if you're doing interstitial monitoring for your piping release detection and you have sensors that are continually checking your sumps. You don't need to open up your dispenser sumps and your tank sumps every 30 days and do a visual inspection as long as you have sensors in there that are doing them for you. That went away with the new regulations. However, if you're doing manual interstitial monitoring where you don't have sensors, then you would have to do your monthly sump checks by opening up the tank sumps and dispenser sumps. With the annual walkthrough inspection, so once a year, you're going to need to visually check all containment sumps. So you're going to need to open up your under-dispenser containment sumps, those big tank top sump lids. You're going to need to visually inspect them for any liquid debris and damage. You're also going to need to visually check your tank gauge sticks and if you're using groundwater bailers to make sure that they're in good working condition as well. So once again, annual walkthrough inspections, all sumps need to be inspected, and your tank gauge stick, you need to make sure that that's in good working condition. Many of Cromco's customers just have us add that on to our annual visit, our annual compliance visit when we come around, but it is something that you can do, owners can do on their own. You don't have to hire someone to do it, but it is going to need to be done. This is what we hope all of our sumps look like. Make sure the gauge sticks that you can read them down to 1/8 of an inch. There is no certification required to do 30-day and annual walkthrough inspections. They're designed for the ABC operators to do. It can be the ABC operator at the facility. It can be an individual working under the direction of the AB operator. So like I said, you can hire a contractor to do it, but make sure that it's somebody that has a little bit of knowledge of the tank system that's doing these inspections. If it's not documented, it never happened. One thing DEP didn't do, they did not develop a form for the monthly and annual walkthrough inspections. There is a sample walkthrough inspection that I have. I'd be happy to email to anybody. Or if you have EPA's guidance document, operating and maintaining tank systems, this inspection is on page 54 of that document. I can also send that document out to anybody that would like it. So now you're probably asking yourself, okay, I need to do all this new testing and inspections. I get it. Okay, when do I need to start doing this stuff? So the due date for the new testing, there is no drop dead due date, one due date for every facility. The due date is based on when your next 3-year facility operations inspection is due. You can go to your registration certificate and take a look and see when your next inspection is due. And that's going to help you determine when you need to do all this new testing. So here on this slide, if your next facility operations inspection, if your next 3-year inspection is due between December 22nd of 2018, so that was the date of the new regulations a couple months ago, and 12/22/2019, so this year, about 7 months out. So if your next inspection is due in that time frame, the due date to do all the new testing, the overfill, the spill buckets, containment sump, automatic tank gauge. All that is going to be due 12/22 of 2021. So if your inspection is due this year, basically you have until 12/22 of 2021 to do all the new testing. However, if your next 3-year inspection is due 12/23/2019, so 12/23 of this year or later, the due date for all the new testing is prior to your next FOI due date. So by the time your next inspection is due, you will need to have done all this new testing. So if your inspection is due January 1st of 2020, you need to have done the overfill inspection, the spill bucket testing, containment sump testing if you're doing interstitial monitoring for release detection, your automatic tank gauge test inspection. All that needs to be done before your next 3-year inspection. When our inspectors come around after 12/22 of 2019, they are going to have to be looking for all this new testing. So if you're budgeting, for your underground storage tank compliance next year, and your inspection is due next year, you're going to want to budget for all the new testing that's going to need to be done. When do you need to start doing the walkthrough inspections? According to the regulations, the due date to start performing the 30-day and annual walkthrough inspections is 12/22 of this year. So you still have a few months to get a plan in place to start doing your 30-day walkthrough inspections and your annual walkthrough inspections. Talk to service providers. If it's something that you as an owner-operator don't want to worry about and don't want to handle, there are many providers out there that are doing this as a service for their customers. Talk to your service provider and see if they would do 30-day walkthrough inspections and annual walkthrough inspections for you. They will do it. But the bottom line is it needs to start being done by 12/22 of this year. If anybody has emergency generator tanks, there are some changes for the emergency generator tanks. They used to be deferred from doing release detection. They had to be registered, but they didn't have to do release detection. They are no longer deferred from doing release detection, and they're going to have to start doing that. So if you have an emergency power generator tank that was installed on or before 11/10 of 2007, you have until 12/21 of 2020 to start doing release detection on those tanks. If your generator tank was installed after 11/10 of 07, so remember 11/10 of 07 is that magic date in Pennsylvania where the tank had to be double wall. You had to start doing interstitial monitoring on those tanks. Those tanks, generator tanks that went in after that date, they're already double walled. They're relatively easy to put a sensor in or start doing release detection. So those tanks only have until the end of this year to start doing release detection. By 12/21 of 2019, those newer tanks, double wall tanks, they have to start doing release detection on the tanks and the piping. The challenge with these tanks is doing release detection on the piping. So some final thoughts before I get into the Q&A. Make sure you're keeping really good records. Tank modification reports. Anytime you have work done to your facility, those records need to be kept for the life of the system, and the inspectors are asking for them now. DEP is really hammering home with the third-party inspectors to be looking at these records. Keep your most recent facility operations inspection, that last 3-year inspection you have. Make sure you have 12 months of tank and piping release detection. Make sure you have your list of A, B, and C operators. Your C operators, remember to refresh them on emergency procedures once a year. That needs to be done. It's a 5 to 10 minute training that needs to be done and documented once every year for your C operators. Keep all of your testing records. Make sure you're investigating alarms and keeping good maintenance records. If you change out a piece of equipment, keep that record. And then again, don't be afraid to ask for help from your service providers. EPA has put out a nice brochure that summarizes these new regulations. Pennsylvania DEP also put out a nice brochure on the regs. I'm more than happy to email this out to anybody that wants it. There are a number of really good resources that EPA has updated since their new regulations came out. Must for us operating and maintaining underground storage tank systems. These documents are free for download on EPA's website, or you can contact us here at Cromco and I'll be happy to email them to you. Straight talk on tanks, understanding release detection, how to inspect and maintain sumps and spill buckets. There's a ton of good information out there. You just need to go out and get it. Again, you can download it from the website. A quick note on stage 2 vapor recovery in Pennsylvania. There are proposed rules out there to allow for existing stage 2 vapor recovery systems to be decommissioned. The rules are not yet final, but they are getting close, possibly by the end of the year. But again, the wheels of legislature grind very slowly. We'll see if that happens by the end of the year. But there are proposed rules to allow for stage 2 to be decommissioned. And what they're looking at is requiring vac assist stage 2 systems to be decommissioned by 12/31 of 2022. After decommissioning, doing annual leak testing, pressure vacuum vent valve testing, some general housekeeping requirements. No testing would be required if you install and operate a continuous pressure monitoring system. I don't really see that happening, but who knows, some might choose to do that. Low permeation hoses, dripless nozzles would need to be installed, so they're looking at that. If you talk to your friends in some other states, so they're doing that over in Jersey right now, requiring that equipment to be installed. Also requiring certified individuals to perform decommissioning and testing moving forward. Cromco has a compliance management group that I'm in charge of here, and we have a number of individuals that can help people out. You can send an email to us at compliancemanagement@cromco.com. We also have dedicated account managers to help you out with scheduling, pricing of all this work. Serviceinfo@cromco.com. One of our account managers will get back to you in a timely manner. Whew, that was a lot of information. We're going to open it up for questions or comments now.
Sure. Ed, thank you very much. I've gotten a couple comments that came in here. This is being recorded, first of all, and you're going to have the ability to replay this. I know Ed covered a lot of information. We asked that he tried to limit this to an hour or so. I know he was doing his best to do that. So there will be a recording available. I would assume Ed is more than happy to also share the file of this presentation. Ed, or would you be okay with that?
I'd be able to share bits and pieces of it. I can't send the whole presentation out.
Okay. I can connect if you do want a specific area, which some people have communicated to me. Please, just add a comment into the question area here, and I'll connect you with Ed after the fact. But like I said, the replay is also another resource for you. So I have a couple questions. I'm probably going to connect Ed, after the fact here, but one that came in, or a few that came in during the section on sump testing.
Yep.
First one is if you have a float high level alarm, do you have to put the float back in if it fails?
So if you're using a high level alarm for overfill protection and it doesn't work, we would put the probe back into the tank, because obviously you're using that probe for inventory purposes. But if the alarm does not work, we would need to investigate that, and you would need to get that repaired, relatively quickly, because if you're relying on that alarm for overfill and it doesn't work, you have no overfill protection on your tank, and that delivery driver will not know when the tank is getting close to being full. He needs to know when the tank's getting close to being full, so he can stop the delivery before it comes squirting out the vent.
Thank you. Next question. when does the regulation start? If we do, I think you already covered this. If a vacuum test fails, can we follow up with a water test on fills?
Yes, the answer is yes, and we do that all the time. We try to test with vacuum first, and if the test passes, that's great. We move on. But if it does not pass, a lot of the times the snowplow rings are the problem on the spill buckets, and we don't want to fail a spill bucket because of a faulty snowplow ring at the very, very top, or if there's a crack in it and we can't get a good seal. So we will follow up with a hydrostatic test, and if it fails the hydrostatic test, then it's a fail. But if it passes the hydrostatic test, we will pass the spill bucket.
Okay, next question. What determines dirty water? Can we reuse the water to test another sump?
The water, yes, it can be reused. Once you start getting a sheen and it starts showing that there's fuel in the water, then it wouldn't need. Then you shouldn't be using it again. Your service providers need to use good common sense when it's time to stop reusing the water. But once it gets too dirty, or if there's signs of fuel on top of the water, it should not be used or reused for testing.
Okay, got a couple requests for you to share that inspection form that you're referring to. I will connect you after the fact. Do you have a form available? Do you have a form available for the 30-day walk-around inspection? Some type of template?
Yep. Yeah, I can, and anybody that wants that, I can email them after the fact. That is in one of the EPA documents. But yeah, it's a good sample that can be used.
Okay. Who completed the annual ATG inspection? Is a certified person required?
Yes, a certified individual is required. It needs to be a UMX, a UMI, a UTT, or an IUM, and they also need to have manufacturer certification on that tank gauge. So if you have a beater root on the wall, you need to make sure that the individual doing the inspection is both beater root certified and Pennsylvania DEP certified in the correct category.
Okay. Thank you. You were talking about testing near the end of your presentation. We did have a question in regards to, can you get a ballpark price for that testing? I hope that makes sense. I can connect you with this person if I have to.
Yeah, I would. I am not the pricing guy here at Cromco. I'll tell you that. I'm the regulation guy. That's enough to worry about. But I can get anybody involved with our account managers who can provide pricing. Okay.
If you're using the ball float only, can you replace it?
No. If you're using the ball float only and it fails the inspection, you need to go to another method of overfill. So you're going to need to either install a high-level alarm or one of those drop tube shut-off devices. You can no longer replace or repair ball floats anymore. No more. If it fails, you got to go to another method.
Excellent. A couple more requests here for some forms, which we will accommodate to. I'm going to give it 30 more seconds for any other questions. Ed, as I said, there are a few specific ones, and I'm going to tie you in directly with the individual after the webinar's over here. But we'll give a couple more seconds here if there's any other questions, and then we will conclude the webinar.
Sounds good. Looks like we did pretty good on time.
Spot on. That hour is perfect. Excellent. Okay. I think we're gonna wrap up here at this point. Any questions? If you don't have Ed's contact information, you want to get in touch with me to connect you. Yeah, there's the email address is right there. My email is tharris@papetroleum.org. Like I said, look for a replay of this webinar here today, and I appreciate everyone's time. Ed, thank you for your time and your expertise on the subject, and look forward to hopefully having everyone join us next month.
Thank you, everybody.
All right, have a good day. Take care.
See you, Ted.
Yep, bye.